Dilip Kumar, Part 3. I was not an exceptionally studious child, but I was a curious and observant one. Being an introvert, I liked being alone, left to my own devices. I left my cousins and other children alone, not wanting to get into senseless arguments with them. I remember I used to ask Dada why the brook near the house flowed ceaselessly and where all the water came from and where it all went. He used to laugh and hoist me on his broad shoulders and walk to the brook and stand and stare at the water. I waited for an answer, but it never came. I realized he had no answer for me. I once overheard him tell Agaji that I asked him questions that were difficult for him to answer and that he wished he had some answers. He also jovially mentioned to Agaji that I was not like the other boys in the family who never wondered or asked difficult questions. I took keen pleasure in roaming around the open spaces in the afternoons on hot summer days when Dadi, after a sumptuous meal, rested in her room. There were no electric fans those days. There were only manually operated pankha made from thick canvas with feather lined cloth wrapped over them, which the servants of the house knew how to loosen from the clasps on the walls. When they tugged the strings, the pankha moved to and fro to create the movement of air. It was a strenuous exercise, but the men who were given the task were quite fit to do it. All of us children of the family were made to sleep in the afternoons as it was not advisable to go out and wander in the lonely streets. I always pretended to sleep, and at times, when I saw the Pankawala and the others in the room sleeping soundly, I stepped out stealthily into the streets. The streets were narrow and some of them were cobbled. I used to make my way through them into the open spaces where there were trees with berries that no one ate. We were always told that the berries were no good and they should be left for the birds and insects to feed upon. Being the curious one, I once climbed one of the trees and began to pluck the berries. I had just begun to show the berries I had plucked into the pocket of my kurta when I heard the voices of men and one of them was chasing the other. I recognized the one who was chasing while I held my breath and sat quietly on the branch I was perched on. The man I recognized was Ghani, who was the caretaker of the orchards my family owned. He was a man of incredible physical strength and height. From the way they were arguing, It seemed that Gunny had caught the man snooping around one of the godowns where dry fruits were stored. I was scared that if Gunny looked up at the tree and saw me, he would report my escapade to Agaji. Fortunately, the two parted amicably after the man apologized to Ghani profusely. I heaved a sigh of relief and scampered home, happy that I had had a lucky escape. My cousins and I were frightened of Ghani. Most times, when I met him in the orchard, he was friendly and he liked lifting me and keeping me on one shoulder while a huge basket of freshly plucked almonds and grapes occupied the other shoulder. The grapes were sent by Dadi in baskets to the Kissa Khwani Bazar market square to be given away to the poor and needy who came asking for food. There was an interesting way the grapes were given as food to the people. The man who rolled out rotis and Indian bread used to make pouches within by slitting them neatly with a sharp knife and they stuffed handful of grapes inside and slammed the slits deftly to close them. Each such bread made a substantial and nutritious meal for a poor hungry man. Ghani used to stride towards our house with ease and unload me and the basket gleefully at the door. Dadi was kind to him and she always gave him money and offered him food. The frightening thing about him was not his demonic appearance, but the mental condition he suffered from. He was in the habit of going into a trance and howling like a wolf on full moon nights while dutifully keeping vigil at the orchard. He could not be quietened by anyone and had to be chained and locked in a room all night. Some nights, when he could not be quietened by anybody and had to be chained and locked in a room all night, someone else kept vigil at the orchard. Sometimes he became all right by the morning and went about his work as if nothing had happened, and sometimes the seizure lasted for a couple of days. Since he could get violent on such occasions, no one went near him. Ghani had everybody's sympathy, and there were all kinds of interpretations about his condition. Some said he had a spirit visiting him on full moon nights, and the spirit could be chased away by someone who practiced exorcism. Others said he was mad and needed treatment. Whatever it was, nobody did anything to rid him of his strange behavior on full moon nights, and it went on unabated till he became very ill and died suddenly on the bed he was chained to. After he died, people living around the orchard said they saw him moving like a shadow in the night, especially on full moon nights. It was frightening even though absurd. The stories did not scare me because my surreptitious outings were in the afternoons, and now that Gunny was not going to catch me, I felt free to continue with my exploration of the plains. One afternoon, I set out, and my first halt was at the godown from where I grabbed handful of almonds and filled my pockets with them. Hardly had I taken my hand out of the pockets when I saw a gun carriage approaching the godown. I immediately pulled the shutter down and crouched on the ground, watching the carriage from a slit in the shutter. I was inside and the action was right outside, so close to the ground that I began to get nervous. There were volleys being fired from the carriage, and I saw some tribals falling prey to the bullets. The men in the gun carriage were English soldiers, and they were yelling and challenging other tribals who were hiding near the godown to come out. Their guns were pointed in the direction of the godown, and there I was hopelessly caught in yet another perilous situation. After some time, the men got tired of waiting for the tribals of the hills to come out, and they turned the carriage to go back. Now, my fear was how to face the tribals if they were really hiding there and if they saw me. I was sensible enough to know that the hill tribes were a dangerous lot and they were outlaws who came to loot and plunder. The daylight outside was waning and I had to return home soon. The spirit in me, even at that tender age, egged me on to take a risk. I briskly raised the shutter and ran out, sprinting at a speed that surprised me when I reached the doorstep of our house. Breathless and exhausted, I just ran into Amma's arms. She and Dadi had been praying, and a search party had been sent to find me. Amma held me close, and I could hear her murmur prayers of gratitude for having brought her son home without a scratch. The news of the firing near the godown had reached the house and its neighborhood when Amma realized that I was not inside. I told them what I had seen from the crack in the shutter. There was anger at first when Agaji and Dada heard what I had narrated, but the fact that I was safe diluted the anger. Agaji was tall, broad shouldered, and handsome. He had an impressive moustache. He and Dada were both hairy, and that explains my hairiness. Agaji walked erect and he wore his patan pajamas and kurtas well. They were made of good cotton and stitched by expert tailors. He preferred pastel shades and was fond of white. He loved Amma very much, but he seldom demonstrated his affection in front of the family members. When he bought something for Amma, he gave it to her quietly in the room they occupied in the upper floor. Since I was always hovering around Amma, I used to see him take out a dupatta or an English talcum powder and give it to her quietly. She would take it matter of factly from him, put it away in the almirah, and steal out of the room quickly. Amma was frail, fair, and petite. At times, in the summer months, on moonlit nights, we slept on mats on the terrace, and I would be stunned by the serene beauty of my Amma's face as the light of the moon fell on her. She would be sound asleep, tired after all the toil during the day. My unmarried Fufis, that is, father's sisters, would also be sleeping there, as also the healthy Persian cats, which were kept as pets largely because they were needed to warm the beds on winter nights. Winter nights assured great fun for the children of the house. The family members frequently gathered on the large terrace with a bonfire lit inside a large sigdi, that is, a brazier, placed in the center. All of us would sit around the sigdi, which provided sufficient warmth to keep the night young and spirited. Quilts were brought along by each member to cover the body from the legs right up to the waists. It was customary for every member to tell a story or to sing a song. If it was a story, it had to be one with a moral and not anything with adult content because the children were listening. Dadi was indeed the first censor I came across in my life. She could abruptly curtail a story if she felt it was not good enough to be told in the presence of the women and children. One of my maternal aunts was married to a man who had a penchant for telling romantic stories. When he tried unleashing one of his stories, he was instantly told by Dadi to go and sleep in his own room and not come up again on the terrace. It was a ban for a lifetime. Dadi welcomed the narration of stories of valor and nobility. If it was an evening of songs, the melodies had to be of clean folk verses or ghazals of eminent Persian poets. It was like the Antakshari of today, except that the continuity depended on content. If the theme for the evening was valor, then it had to be valor all through the night, or if it was a spiritual theme, it had to continue to be so all night. I was not one to sit quietly on one lap all night. If it was an interesting story, I listened with rapt attention. If not, I moved from one lap to another till I fell asleep quite unknowingly as children do. I would wake up the next morning on my warm, soft bed and rub my eyes and wonder who got me there. While the singing and storytelling went on, the Persian cats would be made to sleep on the beds to keep the beds warm for the occupants. That was something peculiar to Peshawar. I have little doubt that my sense of storytelling was ignited during my childhood years in Peshawar. It was not just the winter nights on the terrace that stimulated my imagination. The main market square in Kissa Khwani Bazaar was known those days for the gathering of traders and shopkeepers after the prayers in the quadrangle of the square for some austere entertainment. Every evening I held Agaji's finger and walked with him to the square to listen to the unfolding of a narrative by one of the Maulanas, men known for their piety and religious knowledge. The stories were interesting and were told with appropriate pause and voice modulations by the narrators. The voice would rise to a high pitch when the story took a dramatic turn, and it would fall to an audible low note when the narrative moved on to something tender and tearful. I enjoyed the narrative, and my fertile imagination conjured up the characters and situations in my mind so graphically that I went home and tried enacting the characters with the lines spoken by the Maulanas. I would be alone by myself in some corner of the house where no one would come looking for me. I feel amused now when I reflect on those wonderful evenings when I sat with open mouthed wonder by Agaji's or Dadi's side in the bazaar, absorbing the twists and turns in the stories. Who could have foreseen that several years later I would be participating in storytelling exercises for a medium called cinema? Yet another pastime I indulged in solitude was imitating the ladies and men who came visiting my parents. Amma caught me at it one day and chided me gently, saying it was not good to make fun of elders. I was mimicking Khala Mariam when my mother came in unexpectedly and saw what I was up to. I did not tell Amma that I was not making fun of Khala Mariam, but I was trying to be Khala Mariam for a few moments because she was such an intriguing character. Maybe unconsciously, I was preparing for what was in store for me in the years to come. Kala Mariam was the nightingale of the family. She had a good voice for singing, and all of us grew up from infancy listening to the lullabies she sang to put us to sleep. She was married to a man who was a dandy and dressed up flamboyantly and colorfully. She and her husband had many differences between them, and they spoke to each other only to get into a squabble. He had a chest of drawers in the room, which was his prized possession, and he protected it jealously. She often mocked him, saying, "You sit on the chest of money and treasure like a cobra with its hood unfurled. Take it with you to your grave." He laughed a wicked laugh whenever she said that. It was nothing but entertainment for me at that age when they locked horns. The real drama occurred when Kala Mariam was confined to an isolated room on certain days because she would get possessed by a spirit. I hid myself in the room one day and I heard her voice change into that of a man as she raved about something. She stood up and tore her hair and looked completely different from what she was otherwise. I remember Amma coming rushing into the room to take me away when she realized I was up to my usual exploration of the unknown and was in the room. Kala Mariam suddenly turned soft and gentle and said, "Don't hurt the child, let him be." Amma muttered something and quickly whisked me away. By the next day, she was normal and behaved as if nothing happened. She was close to Amma and confided in her about her husband's wanton ways. On Fridays, the ladies went out to the market, and I remember Amma always waiting for Kala Mariam, who took longer to dress up. Amma wore simple salwar and kameezes that were long and loose. Her head was always covered, and when she stepped outside, she was so completely in parda that I would have had difficulty in identifying her if it were not for her small build and her petite stature that made her stand out among the sturdy, almost masculine Pathan women who swarmed the shops selling women's garments and burqas. There was something she kept chewing, an ilachi, that is cardamom perhaps. I was always following her to the marketplace and she kept a watch on my movements, knowing my propensity to get lost in the crowd. Kala Mariam and Fufi Babjan were not very cordial with each other, though both were very fond of Amma. They dressed up in silks while Amma preferred cottons with small prints. I seldom saw her buy things for herself. She was always buying things for the house. The market was crowded on Fridays because the men too made their purchases. When Amma wanted me to get her favorite bath soap, she would call out to me saying, Yusuf, mera Pierce soap sabun lana. That was how she referred to the soap she used. One side of the market was lined with eateries that served pomegranate seeds and rotis, besides rice preparations and light snacks. There was always a crowd at the eateries because the tempting aroma of gravies wafted to the nostrils of passers-by so strongly that it was difficult for the susceptible to resist a bite. There were shops that sold beautiful silks and cottons, laces of all colors, dupattas, and braid tassels. We were living in undivided India at that time, and there was a sizable Hindu population, and the menfolk as well as the women mingled freely with Muslims in the market square, wishing each other and exchanging pleasantries ever so cheerfully. Agaji had many Hindu friends, and one of them was Basheshwar Nathji, who held an important job in the civil services. His elder son came to our house with him a few times and he stunned the ladies with his handsome appearance. That was Raj Kapoor's father, Prithviraj Kapoor. Basheshwarji was very friendly with Aghaji, and I often heard them discuss an impending war, that is, the Second World War, and what was in store for the inhabitants of Peshawar. I listened to their talk intently, but I could not fathom what they were talking about. They were talking about a city called Bombay where business opportunities were many. Then one day I heard Agaji tell Dada that he was going to Bombay to explore such opportunities and he intended to go alone first. The war was inevitable and it was bound to impact the fruit business as transportation of marketable produce from the orchards in Peshawar to markets elsewhere would become difficult. Before I knew it, he was off to Bombay one morning. As mentioned earlier, the eldest of my parents' offspring was my sister Sakina Begum. She was most unlike Amma in her nature and demeanor. When we were in Peshawar, she was quite young. She was attractive in her own way, though not blessed with the serene beauty of Amma. She was stubborn and difficult by nature. I can recall now that she disagreed with Amma often, and there was a mild but ceaseless conflict brewing between them all the time. Agaji took little interest in their altercations, and I think he feigned ignorance only because he felt that women had their own way of solving the internal riddles in their family life without external help. My elder brothers were Noor and Ayub. Noor Sahab was a good 5 years senior, and Ayub Sahab was just a year and a half older. Nur Sahab was a colorful character right from his juvenile years, and he dazzled me and my cousins with his escapades, which came to light from time to time and provoked Agaji to use a cane on him. Evidently, Agaji did not believe in sparing the rod and spoiling his son, but from whatever I can remember of those years in Peshawar, all the blows showered on Noor Sahib had only a transient effect on his unbridled energy and enthusiasm to explore forbidden territories. After each episode, Noor Sahib would be quiet for a while. He would wait for Agaji to go out on his business, and back he would go on his promises to him. As the eldest son, Nur Sahib had a rightful sense of seniority, which rather unrightfully gave him the feeling that he could boss over all of us who were younger than him. Thanks to the age difference, I was seldom in his company. He summoned me occasionally to run an odd errand for him in the marketplace, and I docilely obeyed him, knowing him to be quite a bully. Without doubt, he irritated Amma, who tried relentlessly to curb his mischief. I was close to Ayub. Since he was just a little older, I kept calling him Ayub, and I was rebuked often for that. I had to address him as Ayub Sahib in the presence of my parents. He did not go to school like the rest of us. I could never fathom why he was tutored at home in Urdu and he never received formal school education. I guessed he was not healthy like me and Noor Sahib. There was some intrinsic problem I was not fully aware of and, quite understandably, not made aware of. The divine compensation was that Ayub was blessed with an amazing intellect and sensibilities that were far from ordinary. He was very specially gifted, and my parents were very proud of him. Agaji's absence was hardly felt in the house. I knew he had gone to Bombay, but I did not know why. I remember asking Amma, and she simply told me he had to go there for an important reason and he would be back soon. She was, as usual, busy and attending to something Dadi had asked her to do. I was never one to trouble Amma with questions that she had no time to answer. So I heard her reply without pausing to think too much about it. Thank you very much.